Chapter 4. I get so fucking horny when you mope like that. Across town, we go back to the other movie that's happening in this movie. One of my big problems with this movie is that all of the subplots are really compartmentalized. We've got this thing going on with Valen, but that never ties into OCP, and we've got OCP doing stuff, but that never really goes back to the dirty cops. And then later, we pretty much leave the movie for half an hour to go to China. In the original, everything's slotted together like a machine. We've got our Dick Jones versus Bob subplot over here, and our Murphy versus Boddicker subplot over there, until midway through the second act, we get chocolate in our peanut butter. Clarence shows up at Bob's house and murders him because he's been working for Dick Jones the whole time. We've moved from two unrelated villains into something of a hierarchy. And after RoboCop conquers his own villain, he can then take on the antagonist of his creator. We never get that moment in the remake, so it feels really disconnected and unsatisfying. Instead of being in bed with OCP, Valen just has himself a couple of dirty cops. So right there, he's severed from our main plot. And the biggest twist and turn in his whole story is that the Chief is in on it too. And that lasts all of 6 seconds until it doesn't fucking matter anymore because we have to go back and finish the other story. Where was I? Oh yeah, so Antoine Valen is meeting with his secret cop friends in broad daylight in public so that they can talk about all the crimes that they're committing. Murphy's on the case, and he's such a good cop that you can't bribe him. Especially not now that Lewis got shot, so the only solution left is to kill him. And we are just taking the slowest and most boring possible route to get to Murphy's death. It turns out that Murphy's gonna go visit Lewis this very afternoon, and the dirty cops give Antoine the address to the hospital. But this Diet Clarence Boddicker has suddenly decided that maybe killing cops just ain't for him.
Kill a cop, look it off my shoulder the rest of my life. It's not good for business.
Even though not even 10 minutes ago in movie time,
make sure you kill them both!
I tried to think of a reasonable explanation for this, and the only thing I came up with is that the script is stupid. Eventually, Valen decides that killing a cop might be okay after all, so he sends a guy down to the hospital where Murphy is mumbling sweet nothings into Lewis's ear.
You're not really sleeping, are you? Asshole.
And I thought that this guy was gonna wait by Murphy's car and shoot him or something. But instead, he clips a bomb onto the car and doesn't detonate it until hours later when Murphy goes home. What the fuck was the point of even doing it at the hospital? Back in the other plotline, OCP is trying to figure out who's gonna be America's next top RoboCop. For some reason, the marketing guy is presenting the candidates for this procedure. And it's possible that this is meant to be a statement, like that the corporation is so callous that this medical experiment is being governed by the marketing team and not the scientists. But it seems like Dennett has final say on all of this. And at the end of the scene, he even says,
"We have to be scientific. We're not selling a soft drink here, are we?"
And Sellers agrees. So instead, I prefer to think that Tom's doing this presentation because when only 6 people work at a company as big as OCP, sometimes you gotta pull double duty. So they've got 3 candidates for RoboCop, a fat guy, a black guy, and this totally healthy amputee. They immediately pass on the fat guy, cause ew, he's fat. But later on we see that they fucking totally carve Murphy's head, lungs, and hand out of his torso. So what's the problem here? Is it because he didn't have a hand? Next up is the black guy who did really well on the urban demographic, so we throw him in the maybe pile, even though he has all of his limbs, and also cerebellar ataxia. It means his brain don't work. And our last candidate is this wheelchair guy. Everybody seems to really like him for the program, but Dennett says it won't work because the wheelchair guy has a history of anger problems. Where the fuck were you a minute ago when this guy had a brain that didn't move his body right? And what about the bigger problem, that maybe this guy is an active, healthy adult that doesn't want to become a freak of science? What the fuck is even the plan here? Is he just gonna be a RoboCop from the knees down, or are you gonna fucking gut him and toss his perfectly good flesh body in the dumpster? This goddamn scene ends up being totally pointless, because what we're supposed to get out of it is that it's pretty fucking hard to find somebody to be RoboCop. But in the next scene, Murphy is crippled by a totally unrelated accident that makes him the perfect candidate for the program. What are the fucking odds? Over in the suburbs, we meet Murphy's boring family. Mrs. Murphy is played by Abby Cornish, who you may remember from such films as Sucker Punch. She's cold and unlikable and all around awful. In fact, out of this trio, the kid is probably the best actor. The fucking kid. And they kick him out of the scene right away anyway so they can talk about the totally pointless Lewis in the hospital plotline. I swear to God, this first act has been specifically engineered to feel as long and drawn out as possible. There's the extra long opening scene that doesn't start the story, the flashback scene after that, and all of the boring, perfunctory conversations that followed where people talked about stuff happening without stuff actually happening. That can't be an accident, right? Even when they go upstairs to fuck, it's this bizarre, non-erotic sex scene. They both just seem like they're about to cry. Like they're being forced to do it, and I'm being forced to watch. And do we have to place the concept of RoboCop fucking so very front and center in the movie? The old movie had those memories of RoboCop's wife coaxing him through the house, but that was a relatively small part of a larger picture. This is right at the beginning of the movie, and it's a large part of what we see of his home life. So for the whole movie, I'm thinking about RoboCop fucking. But if we absolutely did have to have this scene, why does it have to be so gross and lifeless? I know every movie couple can't be like Sarah and Reese, but come on guys, let's see some fucking hustle out there. Luckily, Murphy's car alarm starts going off and we're able to stop all of this mopey heavy petting before I get to, what's the opposite of aroused? And Murphy goes down to check it out. There's this one little detail that I've been obsessing over. Right there. The door. It's the only time that it ever happens in the movie, so I can't decide if it's like a future car thing, or is this the filmmakers fucking up, or is it because of the bomb? Oh yeah, the bomb goes off, but the fucking door. Watch it again, it opens like 4 inches. It's the weirdest thing. Anyhow, so the bomb explodes and Murphy hilariously goes flying, but why didn't they just do this at the hospital? It's not like this puts distance between them and the crime or anything. With the way this is set up, they still had to follow Murphy back to his house, set off his car alarm to lure him back out there, and then detonate the bomb when he got close. Why not just fucking shoot him at this point? Isn't the whole point of a car bomb that you don't generally have to lure a person back to their own fucking car? An undetermined amount of time later, Mrs. Murphy is in a meeting with Dennett and Liz from legal and these other doctors that we've never met before. Dennett is giving a PowerPoint on how fucked up Murphy is, and it turns out he's pretty fucked up. How did Dennett even find out about this so quickly? Does he have a Google alert for maimed police officers? Liz tries to give Mrs. Murphy the hard sell by telling her that she's running out of time, but why the hell are you even in here, Liz? This is a doctor-patient conference. This doesn't fucking concern you, corporate lawyer. This guy over here says that Dennett's program is Murphy's only chance, but who the fuck are you, sir? Are you Murphy's doctor? There's no connective tissue between this and the last scene, so we don't fucking know. And, last question, just what the fuck do you, random doctor, know about this top-secret bleeding-edge RoboCop program? Chapter 5. Taking a break from the movie for a while. 3 months later, Murphy is up and on his feet at a barbecue in his backyard, and all of his friends are there, and he dances with his wife, and if you forgot you were watching RoboCop, you might actually believe this fake out. It turns out he's having some sort of Robo-Matrix dream, but he thinks it's real. For all the jerking himself off Padilla does over naming this character after a philosopher and having that character blatantly state some philosophical concept, there's some really heavy nature of reality shit in this scene that he never talks about. And it's way more subtle than anything else in the movie, so I can only assume it happened by accident. Like, if Murphy's reality can come crashing down in a second, what does that say about your reality? The dichotomy of Murphy's dream that he thinks is real, and his reality that he thinks is a dream is actually kinda interesting, but we never go anywhere with it. Anyhow, so Murphy wakes up and he's on a rack, and Dennett tries to tell him that he was in an accident, but Murphy doesn't believe it. For some reason, they activate his robot body anyways without properly explaining the situation to him. And he gets up and walks around, but then Dennett's assistant Kim casually calls him an amputee. They haven't even told him how badly he was injured, and a second ago he said he was sure that he was either dreaming or wearing a suit. So maybe fucking sugarcoat the amputee shit a bit. Don't you deal with amputees regularly? Jesus. Since Murphy still thinks he has all of his arms and legs, this comes as a bit of a shock to him and he flips up his robo-visor and runs off somewhere. You might have noticed that I'm still calling him Murphy and not RoboCop, and that's because he is still Murphy. In this movie, he wakes up after the accident with his memories and personality totally intact, and the movie alters him excruciatingly slowly until a half hour from now we finally get RoboCop. Padilla says he did it this way to introduce 3 different concepts of what it is that makes a human. Is it your body, your free will, or your emotions? Well, we deal with the concept of your body not being you earlier in the movie, and we deal with RoboCop's lack of free will with the whole red asset thing. So the only concept of these 3 that is uniquely introduced in this entire post-accident pre-RoboCop limbo is that your emotions make you human. Why did we need to spend all this time getting there? We could have been back in Detroit fighting crime. The original RoboCop was lacking all those things too. He just lost them all at the same time, and I think that's actually more powerful. By having RoboCop awaken already missing those vital human elements, the implicit statement is that this is the best that we can do. There's no going back from here. Something was fucking damaged when he died. It's very different from the new movie where he wakes up and he's fine, but then Dennett breaks him. Even if it wasn't intended to, Dennett breaking him implies that Dennett can fix him. It's missing a sense of permanence. Watching Murphy overcome that to return to a state that we know he can exist in is way less satisfying than seeing him achieve something that we didn't know was possible because we thought it shouldn't be. And not just because the doctors told us. Anyhow, so Murphy's running away and he's got his visor up, and with this color scheme I think he actually looks alright. He looks like RoboCop should. Enjoy it while you can though, because this is only a temporary paint job. He's going through the factory and he doesn't know where he is, and the gag is that he's in China and no one can understand him. And on the surface, I agree that it kinda makes sense to make RoboCop in China because that's where consumer electronics come from. But let's just think about that for a second. Are you telling me that they had a man in critical condition with super burns all over his entire body with a very limited amount of time to live, and you threw him on a plane and flew him across the fucking planet, China? There's nothing that we do in China that we couldn't do on a compound outside Detroit. It's just so unnecessary. I guess there is that one scene where RoboCop's running away and Dennett shuts him down and he does a faceplant into a rice paddy. Can't do that in Michigan. Can you even do that in China? I mean, I don't know enough to dispute it, but is it common to have rice paddies directly beside factories? And now one of the dumbest fucking scenes in this entire celluloid train wreck. Dennett says he needs Murphy to see what's left of himself, and someone must have been watching Iron Man because OCP has pretty much the exact same setup as Tony Stark. And there's also a mirror that pops out of the floor so he can look at himself. More and more this is seeming like this room was constructed from the ground up for RoboCop, which is stupid because again, time was a factor in this project. Believe it or not, it pulls me out of the movie a bit when I have to think about the architects rapidly designing and building a new RoboCop wing to your Chinese factory under a literal life or death deadline, but still having the foresight to install a motorized mirror into the floor so that RoboCop can do his hair. And that's just the tip of the iceberg here. Why does he have a single loose flesh hand? Not an arm, a hand. With the way that we're chopping shit off, why save the hand? This is too fucking stupid. In fact, it's so stupid that I thought for sure we were looking at a Chekhov's fleshy human hand situation. Like we were gonna get to the end and he was gonna have to shoot a red asset, but he couldn't because his computer wouldn't let him, but then he uses his flesh hand because that's not caught up in computer rules. It was right fucking there, but instead we do nothing. Murphy says he wants to die and Dennett refuses to help because it goes against his oath as a doctor. Let's just totally ignore that he'd probably just have to go off life support to die and Dennett wouldn't have to do much of anything. I've seen the rest of this movie, and it's way more likely that the real reason he won't pull the plug is because of his oath to collect his paycheck. In this scene, he also makes a really big deal about how he didn't fiddle with Murphy's intellect or emotions, but later on we're gonna find out that he doesn't really give a shit. Later that night, Murphy tries to find his most flattering angle with his selfie camera. He ends up zooming all the way into his face like an out-of-touch parent in a sitcom that can't work a computer, and then he calls his wife to catch up and talk. If I had to pick an element about RoboCop that I cared the least about, it's his family. In the original movie, they were a haunting memory of the normal life that he could never have. It was part of the tragedy of RoboCop that he lost his wife and his son along with his humanity. But while they're useful as a source for his pathos, I would rather have a million scenes of Johnson eating baby food than have one scene of RoboCop chatting with his wife. And it boils down to something really simple. RoboCop's not gonna fuck Johnson. I don't have to worry about his RoboCock. Now, I don't mean to be crass or nothing, but even if you never specifically thought of the phrase RoboCock, after seeing these two interact, you're definitely at least passively wondering about how they could be man and wife, especially with her saying shit like,
"We're gonna make it like it was."
Like it was necessarily includes mopey sex scenes. All she's got to go on is a dimly lit extreme close-up of his face. Does she even know that he doesn't have a penis? Jesus Christ, I'm trying to watch a movie about a robot police officer and they got me thinking about his dick situation. And I guess Murphy starts thinking about his dick situation too, because he abruptly hangs up and looks down at his crotch.
In about 30 seconds, you're gonna have third-degree burns. You know what that means? Jesus! No cock, asshole! You're gonna have a fucking melted dick!
I think one of the main reasons that this movie feels so tedious is that there's no real conflict to tie everything together. Drama needs conflict to sustain itself. Without problems, our characters would have nothing to do. And while the individual issues that the characters face throughout the movie ought to change, it helps if they all kind of come from the same place. It can be something as simple as a Terminator is coming to kill Sarah Connor, and Reese has to find her before it does, and then they have to run away from it, and then they fight it because they can't run anymore. Or it can be more abstract, like in Inception, where our through line is the job. From the planning phase, to executing the heist, to the dive into limbo to save Fisher. Everything comes back to the job. Just like how in RoboCop, everything comes back to OCP and Dick Jones versus Bob. You might have noticed that both of these movies have three kind of steps that stuff happens in, and there's a good reason for that. A staggering majority of stories are written using a 3-act structure. Basically, a story is broken into 3 parts, a beginning, a middle, and an end. In our first act, the elements of the story are set up and our main character comes upon an inciting incident that calls them to action and sets them on their course for the movie. It should fill us with a question that gets us to give a shit. Will Sarah survive the Terminator? Can Cobb pull off Inception? Is Murphy gonna be okay? About a half hour in, our character should cross over a point of no return and the situation changes as they enter into the second act. All of your exposition should be mostly over, and the character should be engaging with the plot. Act 2 is where the action rises and the situation gets more dire for our heroes. Dick orders the police to destroy RoboCop and changes the situation again, which moves us past another point of no return. Act 3 is where the action hits its peak and the story should really be resolving itself by now. The hero has a final confrontation with the villain and our question from Act 1 is answered.
Nice shooting, son. What's your name? Murphy.
The pacing of that movie is basically perfect, and the remake mostly follows that outline too. Almost every character and story beat has a parallel in each movie. The problem is, a lot of these story elements just float through the reboot unconnected with each other, so it doesn't come together for a satisfying conclusion. And then there's a few things that don't really have a counterpart in the original. Each of these things distorts our perfect outline like a funhouse mirror. The addition of Mrs. Murphy and Dennett and Maddox means a reduction on Lewis and Antoine to the point that they're barely in the movie. It's especially noticeable with Maddox and Antoine. In the beginning, it's all about Antoine. Then, when we go to China, Maddox takes his place. And then they flip when we go back to Detroit. But then RoboCop kills Antoine, and now Maddox is important again. And the addition of China is like a miniature act unto itself before we get to Act 2. Nothing that happens during the China act affects anything that happens after. It's so fucking pointless. Chapter 6. If this movie only had a brain. And now Maddox enters the movie proper. He's in charge of testing Murphy and makes sure he's ready to go on the street. I thought he was like a soldier or something, but like I said, sometimes you gotta fill in when only a handful of people work at a Fortune 500 company. Also, he briefs Murphy on all of his weapons and gives him the specs on his armor and shit. Wait, then who's running ops in Tehran right now? Is that war over? Remember RoboCop's awesome gun from the first movie? It was a burst-fire pistol that looked cool as shit and it fucking killed people. In this movie it looks slightly less cool, and it's a taser. What the fuck is RoboCop gonna do with a taser? Tasers are a very real-world concern, and RoboCop is an otherworldly being. For real cops, there's a million reasons why using a taser might be preferable to a firearm. I'm sure most real cops would probably rather arrest someone than gun them down in the street. RoboCop shouldn't give a shit. Detroit shouldn't give a shit. The Detroit that is fucked up enough to need RoboCop would see a drug dealer bleeding to death in the street and say good. And then we start talking about the armor, and RoboCop can be damaged by 50 caliber bullets but nothing lower. Not only is this useless information that gives us nothing unless they're gonna keep telling us what bullets everyone has, but suffice to say that's not how bullets work. And his visor is new and improved too. Most of the time it's down and we get Joel Kinnaman's beautiful face, until he gets threatened and it automatically pops out like a fight boner. I don't really have anything to add to that, I just wanted to say fight boner. But that's not all, folks, because he's also got a 50 caliber assault rifle. And there's a weird dichotomy in there between handing RoboCop a taser to subdue criminals without killing them, and then an assault rifle with extra big bullets to blow their fucking heads off. There's a pretty basic concept in script writing known as show don't tell, and that means exactly what it sounds like. It's more effective to actually show something than just to talk about it. It seems like that should be pretty fucking obvious, but some people need this shit explained to them, because it fucking happens over and over and over and over again throughout this whole movie. This scene with Maddox is no exception. What do all these tech specs add that we couldn't get from seeing RoboCop demolish a target at the range? Why tell us how good his armor is when you can just show us bullets bouncing off of it? And then later, when Clarence shows up with his big gun, we don't need it spelled out for us to realize that that might be a problem for RoboCop. So for no reason, Maddox hates RoboCop and everything he represents, and he's opposed to the whole program. The movie says that Maddox prefers real robots and putting flesh in the mix is a step backwards. But once again, sometimes the movie needs to shut the fuck up, because that doesn't make sense. RoboCop is a stepping stone for using robots in America that he does like. As a clearly high-ranking member of Omnicorp, he should probably know this. Or maybe he's just the janitor and they don't tell him anything. Who fucking knows? Maybe he's just that fucking stupid. He keeps using Tin Man as some sort of anti-RoboCop slur.
Tin Man. Tin Man. Tin Man. Tin Man. Tin Man. Tin Man. Tin Man.
When he prefers men that contain even more tin. So I mean, he's definitely not the sharpest tool. It's time to test out our RoboCop, and I guess we're gonna do that in VR for some reason. They're in this giant fucking warehouse room that's totally empty except for these 2 Matrix beds and a giant view screen in the back. And the idea is that RoboCop has to get a better score on the VR course than the robot. Why is the screen with all the information on the other side of the room from the people that would actually be looking at it? Why not put it on the desk? That way you don't have to look past the robots to see it. And why are we looking at third-person shots of the robots and not their robo-vision? Why does the out-and-out robot even need a Matrix bed? Couldn't its software just exist on the computer separate from a body? For that matter, what the fuck are we even testing here? If this is all in the Matrix, then Murphy's new body isn't being tested, just his brain. His brain that Dennett says he took great pains not to alter. And this entire time, we're treated to Maddox jib-jabbing about how real robots are so much better and Tin Man sucks and I hate him so fucking much I just want to punch him in the throat every time he opens his goddamn mouth.
I wouldn't buy that for $1.
He even puts on some Wizard of Oz music to really drive home this Tin Man thing.
Hey Doc, hope you don't mind. I like a little music while I'm working.
When a man's an empty kettle, he
All right.
should be on his mettle.
All right, let's let the games begin. Let's rock and roll.
Back in America, apparently it's a really big deal that RoboCop failed his test. I guess having the human brain in there makes him slightly slower than a robot, and that is just unacceptable for some reason. Walk with me here a second. RoboCop is just a PR stunt to get people to like robots. You're not making another one. It would be difficult and stupid to even try. You want to sell robots. Your robots should be better than RoboCop. That way, when people start to love RoboCop and they want another one, you can say, well, I can't get you another RoboCop, but if you write a letter to your senator, I can get you something that's even better. Wasn't that the entire point of this enterprise? Sellers says that Dennett's job is on the line because the future of Omnicorp is riding on RoboCop being a success. But why? I mean, I guess RoboCop cost a lot of money, sure. Later on they say that he cost $2.5 billion. But don't you think that the company that builds the US military might be able to eat a loss that size? In another meeting, Tom from marketing comes in with some new designs for RoboCop. He's got this one that looks exactly like the old RoboCop, and then it transforms into whatever the fuck this is. RoboCop is already built. What the fuck are we doing here with new designs? I guess Sellers is on the same page because he vetoes both of these designs and says just paint in black because fuck that Detroit steel. We're supposed to be having a laugh because Tom ran these designs through focus groups, but that's what a company should do when they design a new product. Especially a product that's also a PR campaign that has to appeal to a wide variety of people in every demographic. I guess OCP got the memo that just testing Murphy's brain is kind of a bad way to test his body, so the final exam takes place in an abandoned warehouse somewhere. For no reason, instead of beating one robot, now Murphy has to beat 50. And Maddox. Why? Why is this even in the fucking movie? No one cares about RoboCop graduating from Robo Police Academy. Anyhow, Sellers, Tom, and Liz from Legal came down special just to watch. Hey, wait a second. If you three are here, and Dennett's there, and Maddox is around here somewhere, who's running OCP right now? You didn't leave it with Kim, did you? The management takes a seat in an observation booth with a giant screen of Murphy's POV, and Murphy and Maddox and 50 fucking robots take position in the warehouse. And we get told about how the robots have 47 caliber rounds and they won't hurt you, but Maddox has a 50 and that's real trouble, and I could not begin to give a shit. Shut the fuck up and do your scene. I'll figure it out when he doesn't die after he gets shot. The fight boner is out. Strap yourself in for a boring action scene with a lot of guns, no consequences, and a random rock song. The only other popular music in this entire piece of trash is the Frank Sinatra song they played when he was robot dreaming, but that's different. There's two types of music in movies, source and score. Score is music that isn't actually in the scene, and characters can't hear it. It's entirely a construct outside of the world of the movie, like the John Williams Orchestra for Star Wars. Source is music that the characters can hear, like the club in Terminator. It's coming from something in the scene. It's not a problem to use popular music as your score if the style allows it. Just look at Scorsese. Problem comes when there's only one popular song, and the rest is stock action music. It feels really out of place. Back in the observation room, they're all wondering how Murphy's able to do all this because he totally failed his last test. It turns out that Dennett completely fucked with his brain so that when his fight boner is engorged, a computer takes over, but it makes Murphy feel like he's actually in control. Dennett says that it gives Murphy the illusion of free will. Padilla wanted the movie to be deep, but we never actually engage with these ideas. This illusion of free will thing is a nice speech by Dennett and all, but it doesn't affect anything or even come up again later. In fact, the red asset thing kinda takes over as the symbol for RoboCop's lack of free will. And that's just one of the potentially interesting ideas that just kinda gets left on the table while the director nudges you and says, hey, look at that.
Think about it.
And everyone's like, that's probably super illegal. I don't think that'll work with the Dreyfus Act. And they're totally right, that's definitely not legal. But Sellers says it sounds legal to him, so I guess that's good enough. If OCP unveils this thing that looks, talks, and walks like a robot, don't you think that someone might fucking check to make sure it's on the level? Hang on. That's Kim there. I thought she was running the business. Did you guys just close up for the day? So Murphy is just cleaning up out here. Just look at him go. He gets weirdly limber in all of these action scenes. He moves really slowly and deliberately in all of the other scenes, but when it's action time, he just morphs into a superhero. This whole time, Maddox is jib-jabbing at Murphy and making me hate him even more, and robots are just pouring out of the ceiling, but Murphy doesn't seem to be having any trouble whatsoever. Which is good, because I hate it when I see a hero struggle at all. Where are all these robots even coming from? And why is Murphy so good? Yes, he's got the computer brain now, but shouldn't that make him about as good as, I don't know, one robot? How is he beating 50? Why? How are you gonna sell these robots now? Oh, hey, you liked RoboCop, did ya? Well, you're gonna fucking love these guys. RoboCop can kill 50 of them without even fucking trying. Somehow, Murphy manages to prevail until it's just him and Maddox.
Hey, doctor, what happens if I tase an exoskeleton with a little asshole inside?
Chapter 7. Total lack of emotion. And I'm not talking about Joel Kinnaman's acting. And now we're finally back in the main movie of this movie. Today is the day that Murphy's finally coming home to see his wife and kid. He waits outside in the car with Dennett, and he's all nervous to go in.
Had a pulse that'd be racing.
You do have a pulse.
Heart rate rising.
And I know he knows he has a pulse because he saw his heart in the fucking flesh hand scene. This is what second drafts are for, people. Murphy finally gets up the nerve to go see his wife, and they don't say a single word to each other. His joints are weirdly loud in this scene, and I think they're trying to accentuate his robot body to contrast with his old life. If you do this when his wife has her face up against his cold steel bosom, it's making me think of his Roboner again and the mechanics of robo-sex. And I think Mrs. Murphy is too, because she's not saying a whole lot. The original played with this contrast between Murphy's lives too, except there it was played as tragic. Here, we're supposed to pretend like having a husband with a battle chassis might just work out in the end, and it's fucking painful. The fact that they exchange zero dialogue here doesn't fill me with a lot of hope either. Mrs. Murphy only has one line in this whole scene.
It's okay, sweetie.
The reunion with the kid is pretty fucking hilarious though. He's obviously scared as shit, and Joel Kinnaman handles the whole thing really awkwardly.
Like a daddy suit needs some special handling. You understand?
Don't mislead the kid into thinking that you're wearing a suit. You're not even a torso, so don't pretend like you might all go swimming one day. And beyond that, you're essentially saying, hey, 8-year-old child, I was killed and brought back to life as a horrifying abomination of science, and as such, the mechanical monster sustaining my fragile remains requires something that I'll explain to you with a vague euphemism. Are you getting all this? No, he does not fucking understand. His little brain can probably barely deal with his dead dad coming back to life, let alone your special handling. And that's his whole visit with his family. After being gone for 4 months, he comes back to say nothing to his wife and then lie to his kid. Gee, I hope they're a happy family in the end. Murphy goes back to work at the exact same precinct that he worked at before, and I guess he lives there now too. That sure is convenient that the chief was okay with OCP putting untested and possibly illegal machinery on the streets under the Detroit PD badge. Not to mention with all the remodeling that would have to be done to accommodate his Robo bed and the giant screen and the motorcycle exit. And then there's that whole thing about the chief being dirty. Why the fuck would she invite this super crime fighting machine into her life? Oh hey, look, it's Jack, right? Welcome back to the movie. I actually kind of forgot about this guy, because just like almost every other stateside story element, he kind of falls out of the movie for a while. He looks pretty okay now, and it's almost like that time that he got shot had no consequences whatsoever. He's all jazzed because they're gonna finally take down Valen, and I'm glad that they're actually talking about Antoine, because I kind of forgot about him too. What's he been up to this whole time? He's treated as nothing more than a box for the script to check. And when we don't need a bad guy for Murphy to be chasing in the beginning or an action scene in Act 2, he's pretty much gone. I shouldn't even have to mention at this point, but Clarence Boddicker was pretty elegantly woven into the fabric of the original RoboCop. He had connections to the plot throughout the whole story. Antoine Valen, on the other hand, is so unimportant that he could have been totally removed from the script without much difficulty. If Murphy had gotten injured in a car accident, or hit by a bus, or had some sort of autoerotic asphyxiation mishap, it would have been pretty much the same movie. And it's finally fucking time to unveil RoboCop to the world. Jeez, I hope the movie actually starts after this, because it's been a real flatline up until now. Dennett is doing some final preparations, and he decides to upload all of the Detroit PD data into Murphy's brain. Because if there's one thing I know about computers, it's that you should definitely do a software update when you're minutes from doing a big presentation. Especially if everything is working just fine beforehand. Like, are we gonna need all this shit for him to wave at cameras and shake the mayor's hand and whatever the else fuck you need him to do on stage? I feel like it bears repeating, but the company allegedly rides or dies with this project, and this is the public unveiling. So, Murphy has a seizure. Surprise. Maybe when you have a robot that malfunctions when it gets emotional and you have to show it off to the world in 10 minutes, maybe it's not the best goddamn idea to be showing him footage of thousands of crime scenes. No, you're the doctor, I understand, but hear me out. Maybe just leave out the footage of his own murder from 8 different angles. Why do you have so many cameras pointed at Murphy's driveway? Why do you even have any? If you have this level of Big Brother surveillance, why do we need RoboCop? You can tell that the higher-ups are kind of impatient with this whole thing and it's not really important to them. They just want Murphy out on stage. So this entire upload the data scheme must have been pure Dennett. This is important to note for what he's about to do. Dennett's job is on the line, so once again nothing else matters to him anymore. He kicks everyone out of the lab and it's time to fuck with Murphy's brain some more to cover up his own mistakes. Even Kim seems to have problems with this, but Dennett could not begin to give a shit with his own ass on the chopping block. He drains all the dopamine out of Murphy's brain, and I guess that removes his ability to feel feelings. And this is the final step of Murphy's transformation into RoboCop. By assigning a cause to it like that, we've taken away some of the mystery of what happened, so a quick fix doesn't seem too out of the question. In the original, RoboCop's personality and lack of memory seemed like a necessary condition of being RoboCop. It was our ignorance about the procedure, about the extent of his injury, about the human brain itself that provided the necessary gap for the possibility of a soul to live. If we see that he's perfectly fine and then they take the dopamine out and then he's not, it shouldn't take a rocket scientist to write a prescription here. And earlier you fucking fixed missing chunks of his brain by shoving computer chips in there, so I don't know what the big deal is. Fucking figure it out, Dennett. I mentioned before that the steps on Murphy's road to RoboCop We're getting a robot body, losing free will, and losing his emotions. Those were the three things that turn him from a human into a RoboCop. In the original, those were qualities that RoboCop possessed, but they were a consequence of becoming RoboCop, not the cause. By trying to explain the different aspects of RoboCop like this, we run into these weird scenarios. Like, I know he has a robot body, and no free will, and no emotions, sure. But why does that make him not recognize his family? Why is he walking extra robotically now? Why does he blow off the handshake from the fucking mayor? Why does he decide to ignore this ceremony and scan everyone in attendance instead of just standing there like he's supposed to? If he has no emotions, and therefore no reward centers in his brain, and he also hasn't been programmed with any directives as far as we've been told, why is he compelled to fight crime at all?
What's he doing?
He looks like a zombie.
I think he's accessing criminal data.
You're looking at a huge screen of everything he sees with a giant box on it that says accessing criminal records, and you think he's accessing criminal data. So RoboCop scans everyone, and wouldn't you know it, a wanted murderer was just standing there watching the event. Cause why wouldn't a wanted murderer go to a press event at a police station? Anyhow, RoboCop's fight boner pops up and he totally disregards public safety by leaping into the crowd and firing his taser at the murderer. And then he just kinda stands over this guy convulsing on the ground. Cause this is a crazy, crazy world where we put in the brain power to give RoboCop a taser, but we didn't think to give him fucking handcuffs. Novak's back, and this scene is even more useless than the first one he was in. This news broadcast literally just rehashes the scene we just saw in the square. Like, in case you didn't get it or you had to take a piss, Sam Jackson's back to explain it to you with a bunch of fun graphics. And we get the RoboCop theme again, even though it doesn't really fit with the show at all. We hear other bits of music that the show is using, but they're totally different.
Yes, let's not shy away from what this means, people.
Over at OCP, we've got a real problem. Tom from marketing loved the Novak segment and says they can't take RoboCop off the streets because everyone loves him. Dennett has his first good idea of the movie and says they should have him back for more tests. But for some reason, Sellers is perfectly fine with letting his malfunctioning PR stunt killer robot roam the streets. Tests are for fucking eggheads anyways.
I mean, it was like something was interfering with our system. Something beyond chemistry or physics.
Like what? His soul?
Do you get it? Do you get what the movie is supposed to be about? The difference between this and the original movie is that the original skillfully wove its themes into the story in a way that tricked us into asking these questions on our own, rather than just telling us to ask them. And I guess it's time for more double duty at OCP, because now, for no reason, it's Dennett's job to go talk to Mrs. Murphy and keep her at a distance from this whole thing. And as I've already said, Dennett is a real piece of shit. He fucking starts this conversation by saying, "I won't lie to you," and then proceeds to lie non-stop to the next of kin of his patient. Mrs. Murphy even fucking calls him on it, but he just expertly moves on to the next lie. And I'm pretty sure after all the lying and the brain surgery and the unethical experimentation, I think he's supposed to be a good guy in the end. Chapter 8. The Thin Blue Floppy Disk. Finally, the part we've all been theoretically waiting for. Murphy is back on the job. Hooray! Now that he's gone full RoboCop, he looks extra fucking dumb without his mask on. I guess he looks less grotesque without the mask than the original, but that doesn't mean that he should have his face out. This isn't a Judge Dredd scenario where we can't hide all the money that we spent on Stallone. This is Joel fucking Kinnaman. Who? Exactly. We got him for less than $1 million. Anyhow, Robo walks into the station and he's extra robotic now since he lost his emotions, and he says he's taken on such and such random drug dealer case and everybody should be ready to move in when he has the guy. Cause I guess that's just how things work at this police station now. The chief says he can have any case he wants with no questions asked, but why is this corrupt police official giving this freakish automaton free reign over her station when she's kind of involved with his death? Lewis tries to talk to RoboCop, and just like how losing your emotions can make you forget your family for no reason, it can also make you forget your friend. RoboCop totally blows off Lewis to go take down this totally unimportant drug dealer that doesn't matter anything to the story. And it's hard to care that Lewis got stonewalled by Murphy because he's not really a character. He's just there. We never saw him pal around with Murphy like in the old movie. He doesn't have anything of his own going on. Why should we care if Murphy blows him off? RoboCop has a robo-cycle, I guess? It's never really explained or anything, he just has it. I'm actually fucking astonished that we didn't get a scene of the marketing people saying that RoboCop was too cool for a cop car and he needed a custom bike. Seems like that should have been obvious, but whatever. Now I'm more concerned with probably the worst case of distracted driving that I've ever seen. He covers up basically his whole fucking field of vision with computer shit and criminal data. How the fuck can you drive like that? So he's looking for the drug lord, but he can't find him because he's not on any security cameras. But this guy selling drugs on the corner might know where he is, and Robo crashes the drug deal. Luckily, this drug dealer is the only person that doesn't try to flee the scene or even get away at all. He's not even dangerous either. Scans show that he's totally stoned.
Option 1. I shoot you with 50,000 volts, which may cause respiratory failure, organ malfunction, internal burns, and loss of bowel and bladder control. And then I arrest you. Option 2. You tell me where John Biggs' drug lab is located. And then I arrest you. You have 2 seconds to decide.
Jeez, this new RoboCop is awful chatty.
Your move, creep.
After that pointless diversion, RoboCop arrives at the drug lab, and it's kind of like the drug lab in the first movie, except it sucks. The old movie had this wicked scene with Clarence before Robo showed up. This is just some guy. Whatever, it's a boring action scene where a lot of guns go off with no blood. And it's here that the absurdity of arming RoboCop with both a taser and a .50 caliber assault rifle comes to a head. Because he's using both simultaneously. One hand making extra sure that people are dead, and the other just kinda knocking them on their ass for a while. How does he decide who gets a bullet and who gets tased? If this movie wasn't so obvious all the time, I might think this was some sort of comment on police brutality with RoboCop as the ultimate arbiter of life in one hand and death in the other. But somehow I think that might be above this movie's reading level. OCP's been watching this whole time through a security camera feed of the drug lab. And that sound you just heard was a fucking blood vessel bursting in my brain. I get why you'd have cameras in your drug lab. You don't want people stealing your shit. That makes sense. But what the fuck could possibly possess you to hook them up to the internet where the cops could see? Furthermore, remember that scene from 2 fucking seconds ago where RoboCop chased down the street dealer? The entire goddamn point was that we couldn't find the drug lord on a camera. I assume that was because the cops just didn't have access to the lab cameras, but I guess he was just off in a fucking corner somewhere when RoboCop did the search.
Congratulations, Doctor. You did it.
Yes, I did.
Fucking blow me, Dennett. I feel negative bad for you. Time for another episode of the Pat Novak Robot Adventure Hour. Every time we see the Novak element, he's talking about robots. I would imagine there are other topics the show might cover, but I honestly don't fucking know. And that made me realize something very important about the setting on the whole as it's presented in the movie. I know a lot about these robots and whether people like them or not. I know dick about anything else. The technology, the politics, the general mood of the people, everything non-robot related just doesn't fucking exist. Anyhow, Novak has Dreyfus Skyping in, but for some reason he got Sellers to fly all the way down to the studio. They argue a bit and talk about the central conflict of the movie. With the way we've set up this conflict, since it solely exists in the hearts and minds of each and every American, the only way that we can really show any progress one way or the other is with polls and charts. And that's fucking boring. Sellers says they've cut crime by 80% with just one RoboCop. Wait, 80%? Seriously? Oh, wow, on his first day, too. And before Dreyfus can even respond, Novak hangs up on him, which kind of begs the question. And this question is for you, Jose Padilla, as you watch this on the internet in Brazil. With a show that is always about robots, and so very clearly biased towards the OCP side of the issue, and with all of the satirical points about the media that we're trying to make, how the fuck did you miss making the Novak element brought to you by OCP? Back in Detroit, Antoine finally falls back into the movie. He's all pissed off because he can't sell any guns with RoboCop on the street, so he's just stockpiling them all in his warehouse. And I can't decide if he stole all those guns from police lockup, because that would be fucking crazy, or if he can get guns from elsewhere but still chooses to steal guns from the cops, because that would also be fucking crazy. The dirty cops say that Antoine has nothing to worry about because there's no way that RoboCop could find any evidence against him, and he'd have to make it up out of thin air. Except, evidence never really factors into Murphy's decision to go after Valen at all. He gets his memory back and remembers that Valen did it and then goes after him. Either way, Valen says he's ready for him.